Picture a remote, quiet homestead, far from the noise of the city, a place where you'd expect to find peace and solitude. Now imagine that very same place becoming the setting for a mystery so unsettling, so strange, that it continues to echo through the decades, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. This is the story of a dark event on American soil that bears an eerie resemblance to one of Europe's most infamous unsolved crimes, the Hinterkaifeck murders. It's a chilling tale of isolation, unexplained phenomena, and a brutal act that defies easy explanation. In the time leading up to the tragedy, the family living on this isolated property began to notice things that were out of the ordinary. Subtle signs that something was amiss. It started with small disturbances, the kind you might dismiss at first. There were unexplained movements glimpsed at the edge of the property line, shadows that seemed to shift just out of the corner of one's eye. Then came the sounds unfamiliar noises in the dead of night, like footsteps on dry leaves where there should have been none, or the faint creak of a floorboard from an empty part of the house. Most unnerving was the tangible evidence that someone had been there without permission. A set of keys might go missing from its usual hook, only to reappear in an odd spot days later. Tools from the barn would be found moved, or a gate left open when it was always kept shut. It was as if an unseen visitor was exploring their world, learning its layout, and watching their every move. These weren't overt threats, but a slow, creeping sense of being watched, of a presence that had no right to be there. The family grew uneasy, their sense of security slowly eroding with each strange occurrence. They were isolated, miles from their nearest neighbors, and the feeling that they were not alone became a constant, nagging fear. Was it a prankster? A drifter? Or something far more sinister? They couldn't know, but the quiet dread was building, a prelude to the horror that was about to unfold. In the days that followed, the strange silence from the homestead became just as unnerving as the noises that preceded it. Neighbors, accustomed to the familiar rhythms of farm life. The morning smoke from the chimney, the sound of the tractor, the sight of the family tending to their chores noticed a sudden, jarring stillness. The house that was once a beacon of life in the rural landscape became dark and quiet. Mail piled up, untouched. The farm animals, usually tended to with care, were left to their own devices, their calls echoing a sense of neglect and distress. One neighbor later recalled seeing a figure near the property line around the time the silence began, but thought little of it, assuming it was one of the family members. Another reported a brief, unsettling conversation days earlier, where one of the family members seemed unusually reserved and anxious, their usual warmth replaced by a distracted, worried air. This abrupt shift in behavior, this complete cessation of all normal activity, felt deeply unnatural. The initial curiosity among the neighbors slowly morphed into a growing concern. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy and ominous. It was a kind of silence that suggests something is terribly wrong. After a few days of this unnerving stillness, the unease was too great to ignore. The community decided it was time to check on the family, hoping to find a simple explanation but fearing the worst. When authorities were finally called to the scene after concerned neighbors raised the alarm, they stepped into a situation already clouded by confusion and delay. By the time law enforcement arrived, the scene of the crime had been significantly disturbed. Well-meaning neighbors, driven by worry, had entered the home, inadvertently trampling over potential footprints, smudging fingerprints, and moving objects from their original positions. This contamination of the crime scene was a critical blow to the investigation right from the start. Crucial details that could have pointed to a suspect or explained the sequence of events were lost forever in those initial moments of chaos and concern. Investigators were faced with a puzzle where half the pieces were missing. They had to rely on witness testimonies that were often contradictory, colored by fear in the passage of time. The initial responders, perhaps overwhelmed by the grim discovery in such a quiet community, may not have followed protocol with the rigor required for such a complex case. Evidence that might have been collected was overlooked, and the opportunity to secure a pristine scene was gone. This early mishandling made an already difficult investigation nearly impossible. The search for answers was hampered from the very beginning, setting the stage for decades of speculation and frustration as the truth became buried under layers of contaminated evidence and lost opportunities. As investigators meticulously examined the layout of the home, a disturbing picture began to emerge. This was not the scene of a chaotic, spur-of-a-moment attack. Instead, everything about the environment suggested a deliberate and calculated plan. The way the victims were discovered in different parts of the house indicated that the perpetrator had moved through the home with a clear, terrifying purpose. It was as if they knew the layout intimately, navigating from room to room with a chilling efficiency. The attack didn't seem to be a frenzied burst of violence, but a methodical series of actions carried out with cold precision. The choice of weapon, something readily available on the homestead, further pointed to a killer who was patient and resourceful. There was no sign of a forced entry, suggesting the perpetrator might have already been inside the house, hiding and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This idea of a killer lying in wait, silently observing the family in their own home, was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all. It painted a portrait of a predator who wasn't just violent, but also cunning and patient. The crime scene itself was a silent testament to a methodical madness, a planned event that unfolded exactly as the killer intended, leaving investigators to unravel a mystery born not of chaos, but of cold, calculated intent. One of the most baffling aspects of the case was what was left behind. In a typical home invasion or robbery gone wrong, you'd expect to see signs of a frantic search for valuables. Drawers would be pulled out, belongings strewn across the floor, and anything of monetary value would be gone. But here, that wasn't the case at all. Personal belongings, including cash and jewelry that were left in plain sight, remained completely untouched. The pockets of the victims hadn't been searched. The home, aside from the horrific violence that had taken place, was eerily undisturbed in this regard. This lack of theft immediately told investigators that the motive was not financial gain. Robbery was off the table. This wasn't about money or valuables. It was about something far more personal and sinister. The killer or killers hadn't come for the family's possessions. They had come for the family itself. This fact deepened the mystery and steered the investigation away from common criminals toward a much darker psychological profile. What could motivate such a brutal act, if not greed? Was it revenge? A personal grudge? Or was it something even more incomprehensible? An act of violence for its own sake? The untouched valuables were a silent, screaming clue that this crime was rooted in a motive that was deeply personal and profoundly disturbing, making the perpetrator's identity even harder to pinpoint, adding another layer of profound fear to the already horrifying events. Was the evidence suggesting that the killer didn't just commit the act and flee? Some clues hinted that someone may have stayed at the location for a period of time after the murders, or perhaps even returned to the scene. The farm animals had been fed. There was evidence that meals had been prepared and eaten in the kitchen days after the family was believed to have been killed. Imagine the absolute terror of that thought. A perpetrator lingering in the house with their victims, living amongst the dead, carrying on with mundane tasks as if nothing had happened. This detail transformed the crime from a brutal attack into a psychological horror story. It suggested a perpetrator with an incredible level of audacity and a complete lack of normal human empathy. Why would someone stay? Were they savoring their work? Waiting for something or someone? Or were they simply so detached from reality that living in a house of death felt normal to them? This possibility sent a wave of fear through the community. The killer wasn't just a fleeting shadow who struck and disappeared. They were a phantom who could walk among them. Someone who could return to the scene of their own horrific crime without a flicker of remorse. It elevated the fear factor to a whole new level, creating a legend of a killer who was not just violent, but hauntingly present. Despite an intensive investigation and the terror that gripped the community, no definitive suspect was ever confirmed. The case file grew thick with theories, each one plausible yet impossible to prove. Was it a drifter? A nameless face passing through the area who saw an opportunity in the family's isolation? This theory was popular, but no transient matching a potential description was ever found. Was it a vengeful neighbor or a spurned acquaintance? Someone with a hidden grudge that festered into deadly rage? Investigators looked into local disputes and personal relationships, but every lead eventually ran cold. Some even speculated about a member of the family itself, a dark secret hidden within their own ranks, but no evidence ever supported this. The most chilling theories involved a stranger who had become obsessed with the family, the unseen watcher who had been leaving signs for weeks, but without a name or a face. This predator remained a ghost. Every potential suspect was eventually cleared, and every promising lead dissolved into a dead end. The police were left with a collection of maybes and what-ifs. The lack of a clear motive, combined with a contaminated crime scene, meant that, while the who was a mystery, the why was an even greater one, leaving the case suspended in a permanent state of uncertainty. As years turned into decades, the case grew colder, and the path to the truth became even more obscured. Official records, which were once the foundation of the investigation, began to get lost. Files were misplaced during office moves. Evidence was improperly stored and degraded over time, and crucial documents vanished from archives. What was once a clear, albeit grim, picture of the investigation began to fade, along with the physical evidence. Human memory also began to fail. The recollections of neighbors and witnesses, once sharp and vivid, became hazy and unreliable. Stories changed with each retelling, and details that were once certain became fuzzy. Inconsistencies started to appear in the official accounts themselves. Different reports from different officers offered conflicting timelines or details, a result of the initial chaos and the long passage of time. It became difficult to separate fact from rumor, and the original narrative of the crime became entangled with local folklore. The case transitioned from an active investigation into a historical mystery, a tragic local legend. The loss of records and the fading of memories meant that any hope of a future breakthrough, perhaps with new technology, was severely diminished. The truth, it seemed, was not just buried, but was slowly being erased by time itself. The unsettling parallels between this American case and the infamous Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany are impossible to ignore. Both took place on isolated farmsteads, far from the watchful eyes of neighbors. In both instances, the families reported strange, inexplicable occurrences in the days leading up to the attacks. Mysterious footprints in the snow at Hinterkaifeck, odd noises, and moved objects at the American homestead. Both crime scenes suggested a perpetrator who was familiar with the layout of the property and who may have been hiding on site, waiting. In both cases, the murder weapon was a common farm tool, and the motive was clearly not robbery, as valuables were left untouched. The most chilling parallel of all is the evidence that the killer lingered at the scene for days afterward, tending to the livestock and living in the house with the bodies of their victims. And, of course, both crimes remain completely unresolved. No suspect was ever definitively identified, and the cases have become legendary, not just for their brutality, but for their deep, enduring mystery. This American tragedy is often called the American Hinterkaifeck, because it echoes that same terrifying story of isolation, methodical violence, and a killer who simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions and a permanent scar on the local history. To this day, the story of this remote American homestead serves as a chilling reminder that darkness can be found in the most unexpected of places. It's a cautionary tale used to illustrate how even the most quiet, idyllic rural settings can hide terrifying secrets. We often associate danger with bustling cities and anonymous crowds, but this case demonstrates that isolation itself can be a vulnerability. It shows how a family can be silently stalked, observed, and ultimately destroyed, with no one the wiser until it's far too late. The unresolved nature of the crime adds to its cautionary power. The fact that the killer was never caught means they could have been anyone: a neighbor, a stranger, a seemingly ordinary person hiding an unimaginable capacity for evil. The story lingers in the collective consciousness of the region, a piece of dark folklore that parents might use to warn their children about talking to strangers, or a tale told around a campfire that sends a shiver down your spine. It proves that behind the peaceful facade of country life, human nature's darkest potentials can still flourish, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we never see coming. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as haunting as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most compelling unsolved mysteries. See you next time.